peaceful, Hanan. Peaceful, not being peaceful. What about those kids who have been hit?
I'm in favor of a peaceful resolution, and that's where we are.
When come on?
Camp. You serious? You represented everything happened to the Palestinians.
All my life, yes.
So how do you summarize the six that have been under occupation 40 years, some of them 60 years? Why should they, why should they support
There's no military solution. I don't believe any military solution has brought out a just solution, especially to a people who have been victimized and who are weak. And Israel, of course, is the strongest military power in the region. It has over 250 thermonuclear warheads. It has the fourth, not the third now, largest, strongest army in the world. And we're not going to challenge Israel militarily, and you do not make peace by imposition, by military defeat. You may have acquiescence, but you don't have peace. Peace means that there is an element of justice, where you address the victim, the disenfranchised, the weak, the vulnerable, and you empower them. And that's why I think the only way is by peaceful means, because this is, as I said, a conflict or a situation that is based on legality, morality, humanity, of course, ethics and politics involved, and it has to be accepted. In 1988, the Palestinian National Council accepted the two-state solution, which is a historical compromise that people aren't aware of. They don't understand that we accepted 22% of historical Palestine. That 22% is the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza, to build a modern state, on a state that is based on good governance, democracy, rule of law, human rights, and an inclusive state, of course, living side by side next to Israel. The problem is that people, instead of recognizing the enormity of the sacrifice and the compromise, are saying, okay, now recognize Israel and let's see how much more Israel can take of the remaining 22%, which is the territory Israel occupied in 1967. And we're saying no. To me, the model is 67 lines as borders, East Jerusalem as our capital, an equitable and legal solution to the refugee problem. And then you replace the military occupation and control and power politics with neighborly relations. And then if Israel wants to have any type of agreements and special relations, it can do so regionally with the Arab world, with Palestine, as an equal, not as a people under. For a long while, not just Americans, but most of the Western world didn't know who the Palestinians were. Because, again, as I said, they were victims of a myth that ours was a land without a people for a people without a land. And then when we were being presented to the world, we were being presented by our enemies, by the people who had a vested interest in displacing Palestinians and replacing them and building a state of Israel on Palestinian territory. So we were distorted. There were lots of misconceptions, preconceptions, labeling, stereotypes. We were either the pitiful refugees or the fearful terrorists. Our most basic essential humanity was denied, and our narrative was non-existent. And that's why, and the mainstream media and of course the pro-Israeli lobby in the US and so on have had full sway over the public presentation and discourse. And now we're trying to break through, we're trying to counter all the misconceptions, all the distortions. And it's not easy, because we are fair game. The Palestinians are the one people you can malign and address in a racist way and get away with it, because there's nobody questioning you. Now, gradually, people are beginning to hear the Palestinian version, that there is a narrative, an authentic narrative, that we are a people with a humanity, with rights, with a culture, with a history, with a strong affiliation and ties to the land. And we go back centuries, and we're not an accident of history, and we're not a response to the Israeli. A great deal of courage, because before, if you spoke on behalf of the Palestinians, you were labeled and you paid the price, particularly if you were in a position of power or in public position, like people in Congress and so on, who paid a heavy price. Now it's becoming more and more possible, let's say, less costly. On the contrary, many people are feeling that this is a matter of conscience, that they have to speak out. So I'm beginning to see a change. Maybe the mainstream media are a bit more difficult to address. Maybe there are people with vested interests. Maybe the pro-Israeli lobby is still very, very powerful. Maybe the neocons have more pro-Israeli because they take the Bible literally, and they have a connection with the extreme right-wing fundamentalists in Israel as well. But the mainstream, the Christian churches, educational institutions, civil society, think tanks, groups, minorities, ethnic groups, and so on, they are all now willing to speak out, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. Of course, because Obama's message was different from George Bush's message, many people associate it with the Democrats. But again, I still think that it is not party politics. It's a question of awareness, responsibility of knowledge, and a question of commitment to justice.
Have I good luck?
You're welcome.
Could I ask?